He knows.
So Juan, would you lead us in a prayer or a meditation? Would
Yeah,
you
gladly. Yeah,
care
yeah, yeah.
to? All right.
Okay, let's tune in our hearts and minds and souls to this beautiful energy that is all around us right now, is embracing us, within us, and everywhere. Let's ask the spirit guides and all angels and archangels and all the spirits of the kingdom of heaven to be with us now, to open our minds, to help us be receptive to this beautiful knowledge, to this wisdom from the divine that we have the opportunity to receive at this beautiful hour. Heavenly Father, bless us and guide us and really prepare us so that we, through these lectures, we can slowly but surely liberate our souls, learn what we need to learn, and really overcome all the hurdles and obstacles and all the inner impediments that are prohibiting us from being one with thee.
That the intercom?
Take this hour, bless these hours, and be with us all through it. Help us to become your instrument of love, of peace and joy in this world, to all those who cross our paths. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you, Juan. All right, this lecture, 154. Pulsation of consciousness. Now, everyone knows physical systems are always pulsating and vibrating. You know, everything that exists pulsates and vibrates, like living things. There's a cycle of pulsation. And the guide says that it's three elements. There is the expanding, the static, and the contracting or the restrictive. That's, of course, when we breathe, expand our lungs, pause, exhale. So this three-phase process of pulsation is common to physical things, but the guide says it's also common to the non-physical. It's also common to the emotional and the spiritual aspects of our beings, which is kind of interesting. That takes a little bit of meditation about what exactly that means. What are the cycles of the emotions or the spirit, as opposed to the physical cycles that are most apparent to us? There's something called soul movements that the guide talks about in this lecture and in several other lectures. Now, this concept of soul movements is something that we have to talk about. It is kind of a subtle, the way I see it really is that the famous metaphor of the iceberg. The iceberg, you only see the top 1/10. The rest of it is underneath. So we see that. I often talk about this with friends of mine who are wondering why they're kind of compelled to do things they don't really want to do. It's because the bottom of the iceberg is more powerful. The unconscious is underneath. You don't see it, but it really is the center of gravity in your life, and it guides you around, and it basically controls what you do. And the less you understand about your own consciousness, the more you're driven by the unconscious. So I'm kind of looking at the soul movements in sort of a similar way. The soul movements are, however, a higher self aspect of that. The soul movements are something that carries us along. And often we don't really tune into them and see what they are and see how to understand them and gravitate, move with them. And I think we can talk about that later on after I go through the lecture. All right. So in the beginning, the guide says that, as he often does, that our efforts on the path will pay off. Efforts on the path must lead you home to your real innermost self. The slow evolution, raising of consciousness that occurs when one continually works to understand spiritual laws and spiritual reality. So I often make this point, which is that the more you kind of imbibe the lectures or spiritual truth, it kind of affects you deeply. It changes you. It changes your energy. Something changes in you slowly. So in other words, the intellect is always trying to get the spiritual laws and codify everything and formulate it. But another process is going on at the same time, I think. It's a process of somehow a part of your soul is growing and learning from these concepts. It's not necessarily the intellectual. People often complain the lectures are very intellectual, but there's something else that's going on. I think they're touching us deeply. All right, he says at the beginning of the lecture. So the guide says, of course, that also that has to do with the tension between life and death. That as you go on in life, you start achieving an understanding or perception of eternal life. You start getting the fact that death doesn't really exist. He says, eternal life in the absolute cannot reveal itself in one sudden manifestation. It reveals itself gradually as consciousness expands and as time expands from one dimension to another. So as this process goes on of spiritual deepening, one ceases to worry that much about death. I think that's what the guide is saying. All right. Well, I didn't want to forget in the first paragraph, the guide says that fear and hate are the same thing. Fear and hate are the same thing. Where there's fear, there's hate. And where there's hate, there's fear. Every lecture touches on that, right?
What did you say last?
That every lecture very often talks about that. You know, the big obstacle that we have is fear. And now the guide says fear and hate are the same thing.
I couldn't grasp that, and I have to admit that just for you to be aware, I was busy, but that's an excuse. You know, Eva and John Pierracco,
Yes.
looks easy, but it's very, very deep stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And because I read a lot of books, I know that I have to understand and have to be. It was very difficult for me to get into because as I start reading, you know, the pulsation, you know, there are things that, you know, we can now see and touch. So I need, in order to get into, this is me with Eva Pierracos and John and all these people with the Pathwork, because I've been following this for like 20 years, 25 years. It's like I have to be concentrated in a very special place to read and go very smooth, for me to understand. And if I don't have this relaxed mind, if I'm worried about my son's birthday or worried because I have to go to the doctor or whatever, just reading it is like a parrot, like I'm reading and then I can't. So I apologize that I read little and I read here a little, and I can see that it's a difficult stuff. The only thing that I couldn't grab is, I don't know, because I was not relaxed, is that fear is, when we have fear, is automatically with hate. We have this, it is the same thing. I couldn't grasp it, and I didn't put my energy to grasp it, so I apologize. If
Okay,
somebody
well,
grasps
we
it,
can talk about that, but let's
We'll
go
talk about
into
it together.
the main points of the lecture. As I earlier said, that the guide now talks about end of page 1, beginning of page 2, these three aspects of the expanding, the static, and the restrictive. These aspects of pulsation. Says that anything that lives manifests these three, this cycle. Expanding, static, and restrictive. But it also has to do with the soul movements. We talked about that earlier. It requires a certain amount of tuning in on the soul movements and inner reality of the self to realize these layers, to experience them. So it's not just on the physical plane. He says, whereas the physical movements of expansion, restricting, and stasis apply to the three-dimensional world, the same movements apply to the emotional, mental, and spiritual levels, and they're not set in three-dimensional space For that reason, he says, they seem, quote, irregular and haphazard, but they are subject to their own laws. So it's kind of an invitation to think about what these principles mean for the emotions and the spirit. The guide says, the pulsation of consciousness expresses the state of consciousness at any given moment, the degree of self-realization and growth, or their lack. It expresses the particular meaning where growth is most needed, where it may be overemphasized at the price of neglecting other areas. People are often aware of phases or cycles in their lives. They feel they have good times and bad times. So here the guide is talking about how the cycle gets interrupted. I mean, I think the common thing is for people to, he says later in the lecture, talk about fear of expansion or contracting all of a sudden, as opposed to allowing something to be experienced. This lecture really is just about allowing yourself to experience negativity, of course, as all the lectures are really, allowing yourself to fully experience it and not defend against it. All right, so expansion is reaching out. The restricting is bringing in or gathering in. And the static, he says, is the assimilation of both and the transition from one to the other. He says, in the healthy organism, the changing from one to the other of these three movements occurs regularly and meaningfully. All right. On page 3.
Which paragraph?
The first full paragraph.
First four?
The guy talks about the misconception around expansion. He says, in a disturbed organism distorted by misconceptions, the expanding movement appears fraught with danger. The disturbed organism is in fear, and fear makes expansion appear painful and threatening. I mean, I think we can all relate to this. You know, times where we were afraid to expand, whether it's reaching out to a new person or reaching out to a new opportunity. You're afraid. You think things may not work out. You want to stay in your comfort zone.
Yeah. Especially relationship. You feel
Relationships,
hurt,
right?
you
Of
know.
course.
Yeah.
In expanding in a relationship, you make yourself vulnerable, and obviously you feel threatened by that. Yeah. So, of course, as the guide always says in third paragraph, all outer or apparently outer experience coming to humans is, as we know, in reality, self-produced. It is a reflection of what already exists within. It could not come your way without it. It could not come your way from without if it were not within your consciousness first. All right, so this is one of the central cardinal tenets of the pathwork, that anything that's negative that appears to come from inside is really
It appears to come from
within you.
outside,
I'm sorry, yeah, that appears to come from outside is really within you,
positive stuff too.
positive and negative. So in essence, in a sense, you know, the whole universe is within. We just think that the outside reality is imposed on us when it's really created by ourselves.
Right.
That's heavy duty, you know. It's like it's like the whole thing about that evil can't affect you unless you invite it in one way or another, like in every single horror movie. Someone either commits an act of fornication, I'm joking, or does something like, hey, I don't care about those devils, or does something little, and then all of a sudden all the negative comes in, right? So it's kind of a similar concept that, hey, guess what? It's really inside. Nothing outside really matters or can hurt you unless you kind of allow it, which means you create it. All right.
So true.
Difficult concept to grok, but there it is. For those who are disconnected from their unconscious, this idea seems at best theoretical and all too metaphysical. But for those who explore and discover the mechanisms and reality of their unconscious and can therefore identify and connect with it, experience what I say here as indisputable fact. I mean, I think that, it's pretty straightforward. For most of us, if we see how an interaction could take one of several different outcomes, when I'm talking with a person, I can feel it. Like if I go this way, something else is going to happen. I can choose which way I'm going to go in an interaction. And I can kind of choose something that's going to turn out to be negative. So I've created something that started here with me, or I have the choice of how to interact. So the guide says that, again, on the third paragraph, when negative outer experience comes to those who have not connected with that part of their innermost self that has produced it, they reject the experience, withdraw, and cringe from it. Well, what the pathwork does is, it gives us tremendous agency and power over our lives. Because instead of cringing from something that was imposed on you, your cringing really has to do with something inside of you, where you're making a choice. The organism cramps up in a movement of fear away from that which seems alien, as if it had nothing to do with it. Since in reality, the undesirable outer experience is an aspect of an existing condition within, fighting against it amounts to fighting against the self. To restrict the pulsation of consciousness by hardening up and refusing the experience is therefore completely opposed to the law of growth. So here he talks about the end of the page, bottom of the page, about, again, the phenomenon of soul movement, which he says is something that most people are not aware of. But if you turn inward, you will be acutely aware of their existence and their meaning. So I really believe this is an invitation to meditation for all of us, to try to meditate on what's inside of us and what these soul movements are. You will see the difference in soul movements when you are in harmony with yourself, when you feel that all is right between yourself and life, and when not. The harmonious soul movements will fill you with a wonderful, subtle, but distinct movement that is vibrant and pleasurable. In a nutshell, and kind of summarizing the whole lecture, if you're able to reach out fearlessly, even when the outer experience is doubtful and not necessarily desirable, the fearless meaning of it enables you to transcend the experience, to truly assimilate it. The restricting movement then does not cramp up and congest. It remains organic. During the inward movement, the consciousness on its deepest levels corrects the misconceptions that have brought about the unwelcome experience. Now that's very interesting, right? By not cringing away from it, from the ongoing pulse beat, by meeting what first appears as pain, the ingathering movement may briefly intensify the pain. But soon, if the pain is truly met, it reduces itself naturally. On the next outgoing beat, the waste, misconception, fear, is expelled just as the physical organism expels waste. The movements that follow are soon in pleasure where they first were in pain. So, I can't help but thinking about the pulsatory movement of a cell, in biology, and how the cells are expanding, contracting, excreting. So, the idea that we're able to kind of excrete the waste biological metaphor, right? Just as a physical organism expels waste. So if we meet the pain, go through the pain, then I guess we expel the misconception. Now that I think is a very, very interesting, very cool metaphor. All right. So the guide on page 4 talks about phases of life. I'm not exactly sure what he means by this. Maybe we can discuss it. Each phase concentrates on certain aspects of your being, and each difficulty and hardship requests something from you. So what are the phases of life? I'm going to put this up for discussion in a little while. Are they childhood, adulthood, adolescence, retirement? Are they relationships? Are they geographical changes? The phases. What exactly does the guide mean by phases of life? Then, of course, the guide talks about another familiar concept in the middle of the page, which is when Jesus said, resist not evil. In other words, you don't do evil, but you understand it. You dissolve it, buy it through your understanding. All the negativity in the world stems from something one believes in that is not according to reality. No matter what the negative, or whether it appears in one's private life or not, it must be caused from within, from a wrong idea, according to which one functions, moves, lives, responds, and reacts. Look at the illusion of separateness between your outer and inner life as an optical illusion. That's an interesting phrase, isn't it? I often got told in the Pathwork, Eva would say, if something going on in your life, you don't really understand it, just consider that if it was a dream. Think about it as a dream and see if you can interpret it as a dream. So that, I think, is a very graphic illustration of creating reality. That the outer world is really like a dream that we have to interpret. And as we interpret this outer reality, we understand ourselves better, how we've created it. So again, you have to go into the negative, discover its lessons, and you have to do it in a relaxed way. I think that's the big takeaway from this lecture, that when something confronts you that's negative, you have to deal with it in a relaxed way, in a way of that it's part of this purification process. It's part of a process of self-facing that's positive and comforting and uplifting if you take it the right way. You have to go into the negative experience and discover its lessons for you, and do this in a relaxed way. You allow the negative to happen to you and admit it is yours. You declare in your mind your intent to explore and understand its cause. You remain in an open state. So rather than flipping out at the negativity, not dealing with it, retreating into your comfort zone, you try to embrace it and understand it. All right. Page 5. So again, the guide says, being relaxed and undefended seems to court danger. But we have to have the courage to take a chance and find out if that's the truth. If you shrink away from experience, what you're denying is that the cause is within yourself. And shrinking away in fear doesn't help. You have to relax and accept the condition. You have to let the natural movements of expansion, restriction, and stasis to continue unfettered. Pain will diminish with every pulse beat of this cycle. So on page 6, he recaps this discussion about soul movements, observing them, understanding their meaning, and resisting this impulse to cramp up. Recapitulate, he says. Observe your soul movements, understand their meaning, allow them to function naturally. Do not let fear cramp up the natural pulsation. Let the involuntary self-regulating lawfulness establish harmony within by not interfering with fear and resistance. Cooperate with your whole being, with all your sincerity and integrity and your willingness to see the truth in you. So this requires a lot of effort. You know, as the guide often says, you know, we're commanded to kind of do the utmost, make the utmost effort we can here in life, in this life, because we're lucky enough to be incarnated here on this earth plane, where we can actually get results quicker than in the spiritual world. That's what the guide says. In other words, the fact that we're incarnated here with our dualistic vision means we can make progress, better progress. But we have to face the fear. So again, the guide calls for healthy self-assertion, the positive aggression. That can only happen when you're not cramped up inside, he says. When you remain truthfully, bottom of page 6, when you remain truthfully open to the pain, fear, or other destructive emotion, you will not masochistically aggrandize and exaggerate it, nor will you deny it, either by deluding yourself that it does not exist or by refusing to meet it by pulling away. You will simply go through it and thereby reconvert it to its original nature of bliss. So, I mean, that's another pitfall, you know, the intensification of emotions where you aggrandize the negative, you make it into a terrible calamity, you know, unbearable when it really isn't. It's another way to avoid the exploring this pulsation, you know, exploring this rhythm, and probably stops the rhythm when you make it into something that's unbearable. Trauma, right? Drama, big drama.
Don't we something very
Yeah.
because we human
Speak a little louder.
we human being, and I'm working on it, obviously. We human being, it seems like we enjoy the dark side of us, the victimization, because to make it a big, you know, my sister hurt me, and you make it so big because she can't deal with the pain. So my girlfriend comes, and I'm like, oh my God, and ta ta ta, and unconsciously, because we don't do it consciously, oh, I'm going to manipulate my girlfriend. It's like the victimization is there's manipulation, but also is that the attention that we are we don't want to, bottom line, we don't want to feel the pain. Like my shrink said, Regina, once that you learn to go into the pain, you're going to realize it's not so bad, but we're going to, my God, then like the girlfriend, the husband, the daughter, my God, this is what happened to me with the neighbor. So all this victimization seems like it is in our darkness is what I think that John Pierre, one of these, talks about when we find pleasure in the negativity, and we human beings, because our flesh condition, well, human condition, we are very attached to this pleasure into negativity, because the other side is that you like the attention. You know, your girlfriend, your husband, oh my God, this happened to you, and you feel like, oh my God, now I don't have to deal with the pain. It seems like it's an illusion. I give it to my friend, to my husband, and now she's helping me. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
Absolutely, sure.
And it's all an illusion because the pain is there, it's not as big, and whatever you're doing is because we are refusing to go through.
Yeah, right.
That's it. Absolutely.
Did I, yeah.
That's it. Yeah, no, clearly, yes.
All right, so I'll just read the last paragraph of the lecture, and we can all talk about it.
Really?
Last paragraph, page 7, before the questions.
Okay.
There's some interesting questions too. Until now, we have concentrated on the mental activity involved in your search for your true self, for your misconceptions, and in the observation of your mental and emotional processes. So I think until now, I mean, I think the guide's talking about until this lecture 154, 12 years or so. In time, using various new approaches on this path, some of you will begin to experience what might be summed up briefly as a combination of the metaphysical and physical. You will learn to feel and observe the soul movements better than ever before. These soul movements, with their innate inbuilt rhythm and lawfulness, determine your entire life. They determine your state of being, your state of consciousness, your freedom or enslavement to images and misconceptions. They determine the depth and scope and nature of your experiences in life, the degree of aliveness and pleasure, your body structure, and your fulfillment and abundance on all levels of being. The soul movements are the heartbeat of the spirit. All right, so I wanted to ask you, Kevin, if you want to comment on that, on this whole concept of the soul movements.
Sure, I'd love to. It's a tough lecture, first off, to summarize, and you certainly rode the bull all the way through very admirably. So kudos there. You really did touch on all the main points that I think I read earlier today. And like Regina, maybe I gave it about 75% of the attention that it probably did deserve. So it's a lot to grasp for sure. So I wouldn't be surprised if it takes several readings. One of the key parts of, I think I want to talk more, instead of soul movements, I wanted to mention phases first, because I think they're more palatable and graspable to what we experience as humans here on Earth. It's easier, I think, to sense times in one's life where just, let's call it the very nature of experience, or how you live, or what is happening. Is it a time of a pressure, or growth, or maturing, or stay away, time of rest? All of these you could, if you, as the guide is talking here, take time to meditate on areas of your life that have existed. Perhaps it was a divorce that kicked off a new phase. Perhaps it was a marriage that kicked off a new phase, birth of a baby, all of these different things. There are definite moments in your life, and these phases tend to come up. Now, it's not the same for everyone, and what is meaningful to one person and what is life-changing to one can be very different, and create a whole new soul movement or a new expression of these phases, let's say, during that. So it does take a level of sensitivity, let's say, and quiet to be able to discern whether or not you're moving from one phase to another, or whether or not you're deeply within another phase, etc. But I do think that awareness of that naturally comes. You don't have to rack yourself or hit yourself hard a lot. It naturally comes with the work that the guide was saying at the end here in the last paragraph. As you work through what, the mental activities, the emotional processes, observation work, the more years that you put towards those type of processes, the more naturally you'll pick up on areas of your own phases through life, and they'll become more obvious to you as to what your soul was, or what the soul movement itself was kind of requesting of you throughout that portion of your life. So for me, phases are attempts at moving through a soul movement. Okay. And your soul, in a sense, or your connection to the divine, it has the whole life plan idea, and the whole coming to earth for a purpose, incarnating for a purpose, whatever that purpose might be. There are times in your life when, in my opinion, your soul is kind of tugging you a little. And even this lecture talks about it, where it says you will either listen or not to this, or you'll if you don't listen to it now, it'll come back again. Okay. And your soul will tug some more, and it will give you another opportunity to hear that same message, whatever it is, again, that you were here to experience. So in a sense, when I read this, what I'm seeing is a more openness or awareness of relating to these movements through the work, through the effort that you mentioned. I would call it more willingness and consistency than effort. But to me, it's like just a natural effort, consistent, willingness to do the work. Now, there was one other area I guess I wanted to mention a little, and that had to do with the symbolic or the dream work that you brought up. I was a lucid dreamer or active lucid dreamer maybe for 8 to 10 years, somewhere around there. And in that work, you do a lot of dream journaling and you do a lot of, and this was actually before I was really deeply into any spirituality. It was more in a sense for self-growth and just self-learning, let's say, was my mindset at the time. But what you really learn through dream work is the symbology of your own dreams and how to interpret them. And when you learn that symbology, you also learn rather quickly that that symbology is not just within. It's very much active in your external in waking life. So how you feel and how you see the things that occur in your life has such symbolism in it that can help you integrate the spiritual lessons, that can help you naturally sense these soul movements that the guide is talking about here. Okay. So those are really the two main points I guess I wanted to summarize. Does anyone or anybody have any questions on either one? Because I know they're very deep concepts.
Anyone? Barbara?
Well, just as you said, Kevin, there that as you are able to observe and connect on the outer level with these occurrences that are happening in your life, you can then use that to really connect with our inner movement and what it is in there within you that is causing this surfacing of the issues that are coming to the forth. So it's important that that what you say, that part that I connected with very well there, that it is an indication. These outer happenings are indications of something that is demanding observation in the inside.
For sure.
What I mean? That is demanding attention. And as Alan was saying earlier, this is the reason why they are surfacing, because they need to be dealt with. And when you restrict and you fight this observing, this dealing with, this connecting with these inner issues, you actually stop that soul movement. You stop it because you're fighting it. Basically, it's the ego acting in so many ways, and defending and pretending and masking it and denying it, right? But as you are able to calmly, because this calm is very important. I think this is where meditation comes in very handy, because you are able to calm your mind as you practice more and more meditation, and you are at a state where you can actually sit with these issues. And it comes naturally once you learn to calm yourself. You can acquire this state of calmness and kind of like take it with you wherever you go as you progress, in meditation. And this is a key thing, because then it helps you to really connect with this outer discomfort and pain, right? Because this is what it causes. And then when you are able to really feel it, because most of us very often we go through these painful experiences, in relationship, at work, and everywhere, and we don't even pay that much attention. We know it just kind of like evades us, it just go over our heads. But as we are in the state of calmness and we are able to observe and actually feel and connect. Wait a minute, something is abnormal here. This or that doesn't feel right. So then you are able to really connect that and go within and see what is causing that, at the narrow level.
Yeah. There's an additional, that's very true what you said, but there's one additional component I would add on top of that, and that's the awareness of the soul movements or the phases, let's say, because that heartbeat, that pacing of life, it's really self-controlled. And when I mean self, I mean your higher self or your connection to spirit. For me, it's very clear, and it makes me much more patient and loving and accepting of phases of life. It's not all insistence for now. It's not, oh, I need this pain away. Oh, how am I going to live with this pain now? Or how, or why doesn't this happen now? It's not current management. It's more about breathing through life in a sense, okay, as it's talking here, okay? It's about the ebb and flow of life. So you remember the phase for 3 years or so when I gained weight, okay? There's a phase right there. I'll show you that one, okay? Then now look, there's another area now where I'm focused on a different part of my soul movement. And in this case, taking time to live a more, let's say, healthier life, okay, physically, okay, and doing more activity. Now, again, these overlay on other challenges in life, but but each of those moments are not good nor bad. Each of those phases are calling us to give back to spirit or to give to self what it is that I would call it my essence because of other spiritualities that I've worked with, but what my essence is pulling me towards, or if I'm fighting it, what I end up resonating back with. So it's like one of these very slow rubber bands in a sense between essence as it's pulling on life and saying, hey, remember, this is not part of your life plan yet. You need to grow a little bit about X, Y, or Z. It doesn't say that verbally to me, but yet, if I'm resisting it, then I can appreciate why I'm resisting it. I can appreciate that I'm resisting it. I can appreciate that I'm not always going to be resisting it, etc. And at the same time, I might be rushing it, or I might be claiming something that I'm not yet, or I might be trying to be too good or too righteous, etc. So it's this tug of back and forth between what I feel is essence and the soul movements here and the natural soul pulsations. And by having some awareness of those two naturally, what happens over more years is that, how could I put this? You become who you are is larger. It's no longer just your individuated self because you can experience something from a different perspective
Yes.
in the moment. You follow?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I totally get it. Yeah. This inner soul movement it's a great thing. I mean, the way I see it is because it's also being called, I think, universal movement. If we tune in, and I'm practicing this more and more, there is a certain movement to life, to nature, to the whole ebb and flow of life. It's like an intuitive movement. It's like an inner current, that is there. That if you don't resist it, and again, I go back to surrender. To me, that's the key word, because when you are able to connect with that flow and just kind of like surrender to it and just flow with it, with our inner movement, and you can feel it, if you become receptive enough, you can tune into it, and just like, you feel like when you are out of balance in your life with issue, even when you talk, and even, when you do anything, like I was saying earlier about this incident of, the F and E train, you are able to tune into this energy. And it's like, wait a minute, if I do not take this train, it feels like something is out of balance here. So I am better off catching this train, because this movement of energy of a wave of energy is, it's telling me in some very subtle way that this is the right move to go with. So if I go against that, there will be consequences to that, right?
Yeah.
So I am better off going with that harmonious movement, which indicates to me that this is the right flow at this moment and in this or that situation. And if you are able to tune into that and go with it, that inner moving, that intuitive feelings, with that inner prompting, then life is a beautiful journey. But it's not so easy. I mean, you have to be calm. You have to be a certain state of awareness, really, to detect it and kind of like allow yourself to be driven by it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Barbara, do you want to say something?
Well, I had a question, sort
Yeah.
of, when you were talking, Kevin. And see, the idea of how to say this, that the soul movement of that it ultimately would be in flow with universal, and that's like what you were
Yeah.
trying to say.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I just wanted to clarify that. I find personally right now that I'm very aware of like phases in my life because you know, I guess because it's just around the 2-year anniversary of Bill's passing. So that you know, I have that benchmark of, you know, like what was the first year like? And now this is the second year. And just comparing, you know, where it is, changes I've made, and awarenesses. I don't know. I mean, like right now, I feel there's a just in myself reading this lecture was sort of like this feeling of maybe in the transition stage or gathering in stage, and how in some ways it feels like very difficult. You know, I compare it like, oh, you know, last year I was doing so much, or, you know, right after Bill died, I felt so blessed, you know, where, you know, it's like in some ways, like there's part of me that feels more bereft now. And yet there are other aspects that feel full of promise. So
Yeah.
personally, I was connecting a lot with this lecture. The other thing, just to share personally, that I have been more and more aware of some of the feelings that I have in situations where I've always had like a very strong tenet that I connected with the pathwork about self-responsibility. I really, really did. But now I'm finding myself like connecting with feelings of blame that I don't remember having before. You know, it's sort of like where, you know, blame and jealousy and, you know, how they do it, you know, and judgment that I really, it's almost like, where did those come from? Or maybe I had them before, but I wasn't so aware of them, you know. So it's so the lecture really spoke to me a lot about these you know, this cyclical movement. Can I just, this is just one thing I'd like to ask for some maybe experience or help, and I think it relates to this. I my grandson is a very difficult child. He's on the spectrum, and I've been really, this is another thing, I've been making a lot of effort with my son and my grandson to connect, and it's paying off. You know, I'm, you know, the communication is better or whatever. But I'm now so aware of these cycles with my grandson, like we go somewhere and it's like, buy me this, buy me this. I really, really want it. And it's like he can't, it's like it's like it's this crucial thing that he has to have something, you know, and he doesn't, and
How old is he?
he's 8. And you know, we learn like kind of learning how well we can distract him. You can't use arguments or logic,
Right.
you know, and it's like, I know it's his journey, but it's how can I help him?
Well, Marion, you have grandchildren, right?
Older, you're all,
They're older.
all good boys.
Yeah. And just
Just for
He has some problem.
he has, you know, he has
Autistic or something?
yeah, autism, and it's just, you know, he's young, we don't know, you know, and
How severe?
how severe or whatever. I mean, he's very bright,
Yeah.
you know, and he in many ways is very sociable.
I was gonna say, can you be the observer, you know, like,
Uh-huh.
rather than trying to react to what he's saying,
Mhm.
just sort of let it play out and observe, and,
Mhm.
you know, it's hard, like, if you're in a store and he's yelling, I have to have this, or whatever, you know, I don't know.
Mhm.
But, you know, sort of just be the witness to whatever he's going through if it's not, and then maybe something, how you would respond would come through that. Like give it space to be whatever it is, and then, I don't know. I have an 8-year-old grandson too, and he has physical medical issues, he's not on the spectrum, but I was trying to think if he does, you know, like how he acts too, you know, like if it's just like maybe the age too.
I don't know, it's like, observing sounds good.
Yeah.
And the parents have never,
Like giving it space like you would if your own inner thing, if something inner came up that was out of whack with, you know, not aligned with truth or whatever. You would want to observe it first, give it space to be whatever it is, you know, like be its negative thing.
Definitely not giving to it, right? You know, every time.
Well, maybe you have to try to make a connection with him kind of on the spiritual level, in a sense, and kind of ask yourself, like, what does he have to learn from the situation?
Yes.
You know, what can I possibly contribute to his need to whatever lesson he needs
Soul
to learn?
evolvement, yeah.
You know, what does his soul need right now that I could participate in, something like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's different, you know, it with my own children, I remember like talking to them about things like, you know, like helping them, saying like, oh, you really, really, really want that, but now we can't do it, or you can't have it, you know, and, you know, but I know you really want it. And it would, you know, sort of open up, but it feels very different with him. And so the question seems, I think, to ask myself, what is it that he needs now, and what can I do to help with that?
Right, knowing that you can't, quote unquote, fix it.
I can't do anything. but
Right.
It's something I can be a channel for.
Right, that's what I would say.
Anything you want to observe yourself, right?
Uh-huh,
What's coming up
uh-huh.
for you? What are the images? Oh, I'm a bad grandmother. He's calling attention to us over here. I don't want to buy him anything, but maybe I need to buy it. Maybe he really, maybe the most loving thing is to buy him something, buy him whatever it is, right? So just to observe, try to be with your feelings in that moment, right? And not feel like you have to do anything. And then, are you there by yourself with him, or are you there with your son?
This is usually the interactions with my son, and I am truly observing.
Oh, okay.
And I'm like feeling like tearing my hair out, trying to help my son in a way, you know, like go like, you're the parent, you know?
So have you spoken to him? I mean, can you
Yes.
speak to him about it?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
you know, maybe try to come up with a plan.
Uh-huh.
Is there a therapist involved?
Not yet.
he needs to
He
have
doesn't have
therapy.
therapy.
This is, I don't need to make this into.
No, but the problem,
He's actually
But that's
asked
not
and
a
said, I
therapist.
think I would like to see a therapist.
Okay,
And
so some
This-
professional guidance,
Yeah.
you know,
yeah,
as a parent or a grandparent, we're finding ourselves in these awkward situations where we don't know what to do. That's what makes it so challenging, right? And there isn't a playbook, you know, you can't just go on Google and say, oh, my grandson's insisting on getting something every time I go to the store, what do I do? So, you know,
Well, you can do it, but you probably wouldn't get very good advice.
Well, you
But have
might,
artificial intelligence now, you know.
What I was
That's
gonna
right,
say,
let AI solve the problem. That'll work.
What were you gonna say, Teresa?
I was gonna say, like, when Alan was saying about observing yourself, like, I didn't realize your son was, like, do you react to your son like he's not doing it right, or, you know, like, I have that too with my kids, sometimes I
Right.
see them parenting and I'm like, I can't believe they're doing that, you know, like, I don't agree with their parenting style, or, you know, decisions they make, and it's really hard to just like sort of say, well,
Keep your mouth shut.
Yeah.
right?
yeah, like, it's their kids and this is their journey and their,
Mhm.
you know, and, you know, even offering advice if it's not unsolicited,
And they don't want it.
they don't want it.
No.
we
Right.
don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah.
No,
So
Um,
if you're
I'm
if you're
experiencing that with my daughter.
you're
now.
wild,
they don't want it.
You gotta
then you.
stay-
not how he brought you up.
have to figure out.
All right, Beverly, do you have any thoughts about this, or others, or Karen, you wanna make a comment, anything that occurs to you, or Marion?
Yeah, I was thinking about, I mean, I don't know whether or not his deep desire to have the object is a function of the autism or of just being a kid. But I was thinking about sometimes with kids, you can kind of discharge it through fantasy, you know, to kind of match their excitement and say, gee, you really want this? What would you do if you had it? Boy, this is so good. Tell me all about it. You can't have this, but you had this, you know what I mean? To just match his affect and let him fantasize about what he would do if he had it. Because you can't buy him everything he wants. It's like not life.
Correct.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of the idea that our childhood hurts are because we're not able to fully express our emotions when they're immature and young. So like, you know, sometimes I think, you know, should we give kids more space so that they can express emotions or have these emotions, even if they're really negative or whatever, you know, so that they're not, you know, like not make it into something that they, in adulthood, they make it a big deal, or, you know, like the recreating of the childhood hurt, that whole thing. Like, is there, you know, there be a function there for giving the child, you know, giving your parents space? I, you know, because like letting a kid have a temper tantrum sometimes is a really good thing, you know? So, because then they release all that energy and they're not carrying it around. You know, I always bring up Eckhart Tolle, but he talked about when two ducks have a fight and when they're done, the birds both flap their wings before they move on. Like they have to release that energy, you know? So if your grandson is having a meltdown or something, that's what you're sort of talking about, or no?
Yeah, that
Yes.
it's almost like something will trigger that he needs to get somebody buy him something. And
It's just with buying?
well, yeah, he needs have to have something,
Has to happen.
you know, and you sort of like are able to get out of one situation and then you walk down the street and it's like, you
I
know,
have to have that.
have
He
to have
keeps
that.
coming back.
right, that
So-
there's something is triggered that
Yeah.
he's got some kind of need that needs to be.
Yeah.
And so I relate to the idea of the, you know, what is it his soul actually needs?
Right.
And,
Express that.
you know, and,
Meditate on it and feel into it, you know,
Mhm.
and you don't have to be right,
Mhm.
you know.
Mhm.
Um, Marion, do you have any thoughts?
I have lots of thoughts. I I will make a comment, but yeah, I haven't met this child. I don't know what his energy body looks like. At 8 years old, it's 7 when the ego first is more fully formed. He's very young in that sense. So I wouldn't know what I think it's very vital to know in this pathwork about the personalities of head, heart, creator, and he's in his defense when he does that. And that's reason, will, or emotion. And it's very important to know what his dominant one is. And I can't tell just from stories because he could be a very strong will type child. I don't know. Or he could be a distorted emotion type. I don't know. So I can't really say, but I know that there may be some things that you try out and have a little fun with. And empathy is different than sympathy. Empathy is trying to put yourself in his shoes. And I think you're very good at that, Barbara. I think you're able to do that kind of empathy. And so I know going with it, because in your budget, you have plenty of money, but in your budget, you don't have all the money to buy him everything he wants. You could tell him like, or you could make a list. Let's make a list of all those things you want. And let's see when you can get them. I don't know, sort of like going with it, going with the flow, and like, which would you want first? And what would you do with that? Or something where sharing some of his excitement about these things that he wants and getting to sort of go with the flow a little more, which is different than indulging. It's very different than indulging him, getting and granting every request he has. So I don't know if he, as I say, if he's the more dominant will defense, or if, or what. I wouldn't be able to know, without seeing this child. but there's many possibilities to have a little sort of grace, a little fun, find a way to question him about what it is he loves about these objects and maybe hold them, look at them, maybe make a list. Let's make a list of everything you want. I don't know, something. Experiment, try things out.
See, I don't, it's not, it's not the thing, because after he gets it, it's like, it's garbage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know that. I know that it's not about the thing, but the thing is the trigger.
About the.
So
I don't-
use the trigger.
I don't think the
Getting
thing is the
swayed.
trigger. I think it's that there's some emotional need that's the trigger, but,
Well, no. I'm saying it triggers his emotional need.
yeah.
It's an object. He's pointing at something, isn't he?
Well, it can be, it's almost like he'd point at anything, like if you're not gonna
What does he say? What does he say
get
when he wants something?
this,
Well, what is it? Do you remember any of the objects? Do you remember?
We're in a store, he wants to buy this game, he wants to buy that mug, we go out of the store, we walk by a store that's selling frozen yogurt, I want that frozen yogurt. It's
I don't know. I see you do. I see you really want it. I don't know.
yeah.
Do something different than what you're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm not doing too much.
Is he that with you or also with
Oh,
his son?
when no, he knows that I don't put him into situations like that. When I'm with him, I try to do very physical games with him. We bounce the ball back and forth, or we play games like getting into, like, I can do certain physical things that he can't do, or what else?
So in another
Card
word,
games.
he act like
Yeah.
this when he's with his father?
What?
Does he act like this? I want this, I
Yeah,
want
when
this.
he's with his father and when
Oh,
he's
so
with
something to
Sam-
do
when
with
he's
the father.
Yeah, with
Yeah.
with
They always
this other
test their
family.
parents.
Yeah. Not, I mean, I'll be there, sort
Oh,
so.
Do you have any charts of the personality defense types, so you can look at what in those charts is the lower self, the higher self, the angelic aspect. If there's all those aspects in the personality type study, and he's in there somewhere in something, and he's in yours maybe is different, and it's a challenge. And boy, your love is what is there. You even bringing this up is such an example of, when I say love, I don't mean emotional love. I mean your commitment to this child and being the best you can be. And he's awakening something, that's for sure. And he trusts you a great deal.
Thank you.
thanks, Marion. Tracy, I wanted to ask you, what's your take on this lecture? Mhm.
This lecture hits home very squarely on one of the main Pathwork precepts, which is that the external world is a reflection of the internal world, which I like that, because it gives me a sense of control over my own life. So if something is coming at me that, from the outside, I know immediately, well, okay, I can just, my time in victim mentality is about 3 nanoseconds, because I immediately know, which is a relief, because most of my life it was like, somebody did something mean to me, which everybody experiences that continuously. I was like, woe is me, poor me, or whatever. So that's completely gone now, and I still have the same amount of external things happening, it's people stepping on my toe and this and that, whatever. But I don't feel at all. I know it's me. I just instantly know, okay, well, so I immediately go to, well, why are you doing that to yourself, girlfriend? What is it in you so that is actually, it's very, I find this, I'm using Marion's trick of observation. I find this very liberating, because you go through this cycle. First of all, you feel like it's kind of hard to accept. Well, this is all a reflection of me, because our instinct is to blame. Oh, this person did, society did, that's more of an infant kind of a mentality, where you just constantly pointing fingers at this one, society, whatever. But as soon as you accept it, well, no, it's all me. you kind of go through this stage of like, it's almost like frustration or something, because you can't blame, it feels, there's a momentary pleasure on blaming somebody, right? Blaming this, blaming that. And then you like realize, well, no, there's nobody to blame but me. But then so that you go through that, and now it's like, well, okay, great. Since I'm creating it, I can solve, if I can solve it then. No matter how external it may seem. And I have plenty of the stuff, I got kids and this angry kids. It's like, okay, well, what's inside you that's attracting it. So I'm finding this stage kind of liberating, because you don't spend, at least I spend very little time in the victim mentality now, whereas for all of my life I felt, starting with my mother, so that's I've also been in an extreme state of self-observation. Marion's, the first step of transformation is observation, and I'm just constantly, whatever I feel, and you were mentioning this about like, jealousy or anger, this is the things. So me too, it's like, oh, I see it can go through you like that. So, oh, I see you were just jealous about this, he did whatever, and it was, oh, that's, and I'm always like, sort of like now removed from myself and standing in observation myself most of the time. I'm not in Tracy. I'm now, constantly like, oh, you poor thing, you poor you. It's like, but I'm just, and I don't beat myself up anymore, because I went through a whole stage. It was like feeling bad, like, oh, you shouldn't feel that way. Oh, look, you were just jealous. Look, you were just hoping that person would something bad, whatever it is, because and that you feel bad about yourself, like, but I don't now. I don't. It's like, oh, well, look, you just had a bad thought about that person. Oh, you just were hoping that something bad would happen. Oh, you're angry at this, but oh, you're jealous, and just so, but it dissipates so quickly, because as soon as you're observing yourself, you're not in yourself. You're sort of immediately disconnected.
Becoming more of the observer.
You right? You're immediately disconnected. And the other thing I'm noticing is that whatever it is, however bad it is, and we all have done bad things, think bad things, all of it. It's all in it. As soon as you're in the observer of that, you are standing in the truth. You are allowing, you're not pushing it away, you're not hiding from it, you're not making excuses, you're not justifying yourself. You are standing fully in the truth. And when you're standing in the truth, you're connected to the mothership. You're connected to the higher vibrational energy. I call it the mothership, God, universal conscious, doesn't matter what you call it, because it's the same. So love and truth and God and universe, they're all the same. They're just different words for the same thing. So you're vibrating when you're observing truthfully. You're vibrating in a truthful state, and that allows that energy to be pulled into you. So it's almost like the dirty water's going out the bottom and the clean water's coming in little by little by little by little. This is obviously a long slog. It's not quick, but it's so.
Yeah, I'm sure but that was in the lecture, how it talked about, I guess even you said it back today, about the release of waste.
Yeah. Well, that's right. The dirty water is the waste.
Yes.
And I couldn't understand. I said, why is it that when I'm standing in observation of myself, I can feel it, I can just, why, even when I'm observing something really negative, like, oh, you just were mean, you just had a negative thought, you just this, why am I feeling the high vibrational energy because I'm standing in truth. There is no difference between truth and love and God and universal consciousness. It's all the same energy, it's all the highest vibrational energy you have. So you're doing that. You're going to be vibrating at that frequency, therefore attracting more clean water, and I find it so, it's very painful. I mean, I went through, many years. I mean, our first instinct is to try and not see it. We don't want to see the negatives about ourselves. Then once we see it, we want to make an excuse for it, deny. Who wants to say, oh, I was just really a jerk to Joel. I was just really mean to Joel. You know, I mean, who wants to say, you know, or I just had a hateful thought. Oh, it's always about the people you love the most. That's the thing that's like, so the most hateful thoughts I have are about my daughter, my son, you know, the people who I love the most. That's very painful to observe. You don't really have that many negative thoughts. I mean, and they're fleeting, and you have some jerk on the street does whatever. But like the people who you really love, you know, your children, your grandchildren. I mean, because they can hurt you. You know, so then that fear, that hate, like the guide was saying, you know, it's just who wants to see that about yourself? It's not fun. But then eventually you almost become inured to it. Green girl. So you were like, oh, I did this. And then suddenly
No guilt.
no guilt because
fear,
you were just
no
totally standing in the truth. You saw the truth about yourself, and it totally liberated you. And that high vibration that you experienced, that lasted for a whole month. So you're never going to go back down that, you know, I mean, you'll go back down, but you're never going to, it's too much clean water in your vessel. It's really changed you. So it's, even though it's so painful to just say, oh, you were just a jerk. Look at that. You know, even if you don't do anything, the hateful thought you just had. Look at that hateful thought you just had about.
And I knew that hate, and I knew that hate was part of me.
Yeah.
Before that experience happened.
Yeah.
But I couldn't go through it, like I was fighting going
Well,
through
because
it.
you were still attached to the victim. They're doing this to me.
Right.
She's a jerk. Look how she
Right.
excludes me.
But the thing that resonated too at the very beginning, where Alan was saying, the guide says fear and hate are the same thing.
Oh, we gotta get back.
Like and you were saying about that, because I knew I had this little dark hate in me. And the fear was that of seeing it, right? So when I was in that state of grace, or whatever you call it, for a while, I was like, where is that hate? I couldn't find it, and it was really confusing to me because it was such a part of me. Like it was small, but it was like part of me. And I couldn't find it, and the idea, and I was not afraid, I
know.
I didn't feel guilty, I didn't feel afraid.
It's just
But that
like
idea of fear and hate being the same, I really resonated.
It's like Marion always says, and she's right. The first step of transformation is observation. And also the pathwork
You pull
says
yourself away.
the pathwork says
Disidentified.
the mere observation of one's faults and misconceptions will cause them to pixelate. The pathword says that in an early lecture. I remember the first time I read that. For me, for somebody like I'm a lawyer, so you know you got to do something. You got to you got to go to school. You got to read the cases. You got to prepare. You know, I'm very driven by like the external world producing. So when I first read that, and I wish I can remember which lecture, it said the mere. I could probably Google, do those words. It's the mere observation of one's false misconceptions will cause them to, I don't think they use pixelate, but to dissipate. I said, this is a you can't get anything in life by doing that, by just looking at it. That just, I mean, this was, a decade ago when I first started. I was like, this is, how can you accomplish anything by just looking at it? But of course it's true, because of course it's true. So that is a tremendous gift that we've been given.
Yeah.
Like we don't have to really slay dragons. We don't have to be Don Quixote out there, battling with imaginary self-created windmills that we think are the monsters. All we have to do is observe. That is not that hard of an assignment once you get practice. At first it's very hard because you see all this. It's painful to see the negative stuff, but then it becomes like you get inured to it. You get a little bit of like battlefield syndrome or emergency room syndrome, where you just like, oh, here's another bloody person coming in with a gunshot wound. Okay, what do I have to do? You do develop that. I mean, it's a real thing, you just, and it happens with yourself. Oh, I see again, you were just a jerk. Oh, well, that's not the fifth time today. That's the fifth time this morning.
Self-acceptance.
Yeah, and
Said what?
self-acceptance.
Well, what happened also that they're going in the same vein, there's a lot of things to digest from there, but I was connecting when you were talking, Tracy, that we are so fearful of not being perfect.
Yes.
The reason that we don't want to go deep down inside and say, oh, but I have jealousy, oh, I have hate, oh, I have this, oh, I feel inferior, oh, whatever it is in our darkness that as human being is like in, you know, Papa Francisco, which he's Argentine, like me, I love him. Always, of course.
Of course.
Well,
Oh, he's a great guy,
with
though.
this, Argentina is
We all
very
love him.
corrupt, so this is the first Jesuit. I go to a Jesuit church, so I tell the father, Argentina is very corrupt, but at least we did one thing good, is to put the first Jesuit in the Vatican. So we're very proud of something that we did right. But anyway,
But he's really Italian, he's not an Argentinian, which makes him even better, right?
well, he got in Argentina, I'm Italian Argentina. But anyway, he even said, Father Cesalonia, which is the pastor, which he's very friendly with us, because the Jesuits are very open, very progressive. And, you know, whenever I ask you, but Father, why this? And Father, why the other? He goes, well, because it's our human condition.
Yeah.
And this human condition of his answer, it felt for a while that he wants to brush me off because I'm, you know, I'm not inhibited even that he's a pastor. I ask whatever I want. And I thought that he was just the one, it's an easy way, because he's not going to explain to
Which
me
your way.
outside the mass, the church, well, Regina, you know that A, B, C. Well, Regina, is our human condition. And it got me angry until I saw the Pope, which I followed. So when he was coming from Asia, his trip from Asia, that was one of the longest trip recently. In the airplane, there's always the journalist. And they ask you blah, 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 blah. So what do you think? And he says, well, it's our human condition. And when I saw the Pope, no, it's because when you understand and grasp this thing that is a human condition, you get in touch that we are not perfect, no matter how much we're gonna observe in the morning, in the night, we're gonna fail. Because even, and I'm sorry that I'm bringing the Papa Francisco even says, when people ask him, how would you like to be called? And they were expecting, well, the son of God, the follower of Peter, whatever. You know what he says? A sinner. This is the Pope. And this is not because I'm Argentine. I mean, of course I'm biased, but if the
He is a
Pope,
good Pope.
oh, I love him.
He's
And
one
he's
of the
very
best ones,
open-minded.
very bad.
And he's very funny. And
How would you say,
yeah, and if you hear him in Spanish,
No,
he's
he's
very
unbelievable.
Argentinian, and I connect with him because his joke is so funny. But anyway, if the Pope, because that was in me for a long time, if the Pope is admitting that he's not perfect, I feel like, what the hell? This is my talking, because I do a lot of observation. I work very hard on myself, okay?
Beautiful.
I said, Regina, what the hell do you think? I look at myself. If Papa Francesco is admitting to the world that he's a name, I'm a sinner, who I think that I am, this arrogance that we have to want it to be perfect, when the Pope, the maximum in the Catholicism, and there is billion people following him, he tells, I'm not perfect, I'm a sinner. And this is the perfection that we want to be so perfect, because we are so fearful, so terrorized about, it's not only fear, it's, I get in touch with that part of me, that we have this kind of fear, but it's terror, because it makes feel like we are going to be left alone and we got isolated. Because we are not going to be accepted if we are not perfect.
Of course.
And then I go, do I accept Papa Francesco that he's a sinner or he did what? Of course, I love him. So what? Do you understand my point?
Yeah.
And we are so trained to hide. We don't want to go there, because going there to our darkness, that I call, is going to make us realize that, oh, I have hate. Oh, I'm jealous of your t-shirt. I'm jealous of your hair. And whatever, you have a boyfriend and I don't have a boyfriend, whatever it is. Anything, I'm single and my girlfriend, whatever. going to our darkness, automatically it makes us feel like we are not perfect. And if we are not perfect, then if we admit it, then if it's like, oh my God, I'm gonna have a sign here, I hate Mary, or I hate Susan, or have jealousy with this. It feels that way, that everybody, if the admission of our darkness, it feels almost like everybody else. If I admit it, everybody else is gonna know. It's very subconscious, but it's like we're gonna project that we are guilty and we are not good. We are not good. We are not good, and then we feel like they're not gonna accept that, and then we're gonna go into this isolation and no acceptance.
No, it
What-
works the opposite.
Nobody else cares.
It's the opposite. It's
But hold on,
because then, you know, if you admit to
Yeah, that's the important point.
it's not, then everybody,
You know
the
what?
closest I ever felt to
Yeah.
you was that when you told the story about the green girl, because it was like you're exposing that really painful and negative, and ever since that, I mean, that's why I keep bringing it up, because it was so, you know, so she's very profound, sharing with us, this was years ago at this point, this story about this very dark, this very, very, very dark part of herself, and how she was walking through Central Park and she finally, you know, and it was like, I can remember, just, I mean, you were here, and I just remember, like, it was like my whole heart just like opened to, I was like, oh, I'm not the only asshole in the room. She is too. I love her, yes. So it doesn't have the effect of pushing people away from you. It has the opposite effect.
Well, the other thing is, we're
We're
so
so
self-focused.
focused. Oh,
We don't even thinking about you.
yes, that's true.
everybody's going to.
No.
Yeah, no, but the other part of it is,
Nobody cares.
thank God, she
That's the worst part.
we she's not she's got all these faults.
Yeah.
and
Thank
so-
God, I'm
So
safe.
I'm not so bad.
Yeah.
So it all, we
see-
bring it all
You
back
see
to
what you
ourselves.
said? I'm not so bad.
Yeah,
And that
exactly.
comes because I want to be a good girl.
There
I
you
want to be
go.
a good boy. We have the things that
Exactly.
it comes, the origin comes with it when we
Yeah,
are children. We want to
that's
be
right.
good. And
One
I'm all
important
about
point,
it.
I think
We don't
it's
want to get punished.
one
If
important
you want to
point
be
is
accepted of the parents, that's how
Well, I
we
think
can never
that's
grow
why-
out of that.
Why the AA programs work, right? You get into a room, I mean, I haven't been in one, but I have friends, you get into a room, and the first thing you say is, my name is Tracy, I'm an alcoholic. Everybody else in the room is, so then you feel it's like, okay, all right, that's fine, now let's move on, you know, I mean, they say, I mean, I think those 10-step, 12, whatever they're called, they're effective, right? And I think it's because they're so truthful with one another, and they just open themselves up, and everybody says, okay, I'm in good company here, right?
And
I
that-
think what, I'm sorry.
And the other thing that I want to say before I finish about what you said, because it was very moving what you went through all this thing. The other thing is that, I'm sorry, I'm gonna say, but we are caught up in this perfection. We are so, if we become aware that we are so dumb because we are interrupting blocking our own happiness by wanting to be perfect. Because he doesn't care. I mean, he cares, but when we go into our darkness and we accept it, we learn how not to be guilty, and we learn not to be ashamed of it.
Yes.
Power in that.
Because we are
sentence.
terrified of being ashamed.
Yes.
When you learn
Yeah.
not to be ashamed,
Yeah.
then you start the next things when you
Yeah.
go through all this feeling, when
Yeah.
you really open yourself up,
Yeah.
then you start accepting yourself.
Yeah.
Then when you start accepting yourself, you don't care about the acceptance of the others of my, oh, I have to be perfect, otherwise he's not going to accept
You
it.
don't care.
It vanishes
Yeah,
completely, because the fact that you are accepted
Mhm.
and you accept the fact that I can never be perfect because this is our human condition.
Yeah.
Of course, that doesn't mean that if I'm a bitch and whatever, you know, I'm gonna keep saying, oh, I realize my darkness, I'm gonna sit in the thing and
No, right.
no, you
That's
have
different.
to work on yourself to become a better person.
Yeah.
Once that you bring your darkness out.
Right.
But once that you accepting yourself, you have another aura with
Yeah.
people, because you are not hiding your darkness.
Yes.
You become more authentic, and people, when you see your darkness that you openly are,
Yeah.
okay, then your darkness become an attraction. I don't know, it's very difficult to say,
Your
but
open, your willingness to transform
Yeah.
yourself.
it become an
that-
attraction.
It's
Yeah.
attractive.
No, it's,
Mm.
and it, yes, I realized I had this amazing experience, this is very personal, but I was, going through all the sins, I was like, oh, I've sinned every single one, every single sin, and I said, well, I said, and then I said, well,
Oh,
at
wait a
least I haven't murdered anybody in this lifetime, and I said, oh, no, you had an abortion.
You have a what?
You've had an abortion. I killed something. I chose that. So I had to face that head on. It was like, well, that's all of them then. Check, check, check. This was just, and I told Joel, this is Joel's child, and I was just going through the sins. I was like, oh, every single one, but at least I
You
have.
sure it was my child? Now you named all the things.
I think you have.
There wasn't a hearing today? You don't have to answer that, just keep going.
And I remember I was like, I went through this and I was kind of like relieved. I was like, oh, okay, you've but you've never murdered anybody. Okay, and I thought, not so fast, Alphonse. You
Yes.
have.
Yeah, but don't feel so bad because the guy actually says that the soul enters the body.
I know.
Right?
Yeah.
You read that later.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so one small point I think I want to make about your comments. I think it's very important to understand, and this is a little profound, that goes deeper than this when it's kind of like on the surface when you say these are human conditions. That's like, okay, let's not use that as an excuse to do the inner work, right?
No, of
That's one
course.
point. But the other one is that this longing, this desire to reach that perfection is actually legit. This is the higher self. This is the higher self that wants that perfection. It's just that the way we are going about it, that's
Exactly.
the wrong way.
Exactly.
That's the wrong thing.
Because in
So
order
that-
to
yeah.
be perfect, you need to
Because you want to
deal
achieve it
your
with the
darkness.
ego.
Yes,
Exactly.
That you never reach the perfection until you clean your darkness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
you're not gonna
surrender to
clean
that
your
inner spirit.
darkness
Too.
if
Yeah.
you're gonna hide it in your subconscious mind because
Yeah.
you're gonna feel
Yeah,
ashamed.
yeah,
Do
yeah.
you
You
understand?
never
So-
get there that way.
You're never gonna.
Because
do it
even
that
Jesus
way.
says, be perfect as your Father in heaven is
Yes,
perfect.
yes.
Meaning that when you disarm the ego and you surrender to that inner spirit, that's the way to reach that level of highestness that you want to reach.
Yes.
But
Because-
not through the ego,
Yes.
which is what we want to do
Yes.
always, right?
Because
I'm having this put in my face like almost every day.
You
you're
what?
Talking about.
Hmm.
I'm having it put in my face like every day. I mean, I was over here, I'm walking Addison. This guy's on this, I look up and this guy's like right in my face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now I'm trained that if you're in my space, I'm gonna do something, right? He was literally right here. He was looking on he was about my age, he's looking on his phone. And he had his ear plugs in, so he's like this, and he doesn't realize where he is until he's right here. And then he says, oh, I'm so sorry. And it's like I'm looking at myself, right? Because I've been trained in whoever I'm looking at is the divine consciousness manifest. And I'm the divine consciousness manifest. So I'm looking at myself, I'm just looking at me in another form, right? So here, and so I was able to see, he was a nice fellow, he was this is just how he goes around, how he functions, right? He didn't mean anything. And then it occurred to me, you saw him coming towards you. Why didn't you move out
Oh,
of the way?
very good, Joel. Very good. Very good. Yes.
But the
Awesome.
answer was,
Yeah, that's
the
the-
answer was that part of me that we're talking about creating our reality.
The ego was
Yeah.
like, get out of
Wanted
my,
to
this is
create
my
this.
space.
To test me,
Yeah.
to see if I would rip him apart,
Yeah.
because that's how I'm built, or that's how I was built. That I need to release that, and there have been several instances, not quite as dramatic as that, but it's sort of repeating itself in the last few weeks. That, no, you're not gonna tear anybody apart, and even if they bumped into you or they try to hurt you, I would feel terrible if I hurt someone. I don't want to hurt anybody.
know.
I would want to defend myself, to really like to, I think, hug the person and say, God loves you, what are you doing?
That's the real
Let's
you,
just
yeah.
stop.
The
It's
most important
okay.
part of that
Yeah,
observation
yeah.
is you noticed that you could have moved out of his way,
Yeah.
and your ego said, "No way, Jose."
Well, I
I'm
thought,
here.
I thought, I
That's
made
so
the
typical,
mistake of
right?
thinking that he would notice before he got that close, because most people do. You have the peripheral vision where you see
Except
it.
where you're your
But,
phone.
but the point is, you know, there's my imperfection that I'm working with, accepting, you know, I'm human. And the important part is, the more that I see it and accept it in myself, then I accept it in others. I'm not so judgmental. So if you do something to hurt me or disappoint me or whatever, it's okay. You're human too. I'm dealing with my own shit, which the pile is this high.
Yeah.
And so
Me
I'm not
too.
gonna be, you know, like, oh, can you believe you
Yeah,
look
yeah.
at what you did?
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, no, it's okay. I got it. I know,
But
I
the
understand. We're not,
Because if
none of us are
if you give
perfect.
if you give yourself some grace, don't judge yourself so much, then you can extend that to other people. Because you can only treat other people how you treat yourself. You cannot give to somebody else what you don't give to yourself. You
Yeah,
cannot.
very true, very true. Huh.
Should we start the meditation?
I think so. Was anyone like to say some final thoughts or comments? Anyone? Marion, I think Karen is out of the frame now. But if you're there, you could say something if you like.
Well, I just
think
had.
Teresa
Oh, okay. Not done yet.
I didn't know we were getting so close to the
Yeah.
end.
Yeah.
But the first thing was when you were saying about how you realized, I wrote here, why did you put yourself there?
Yeah.
So I was working with my helper and I keep recreating this situation where I'm tempted to submit. And that's not my usual defense, but it is in certain circumstances. And I was in this situation where I went through something and I submitted. And, you know, I went into my submission defense. And afterwards I was like, you know, why did I recreate this, you know? And the question was, well, you put yourself there. Like, why did you put yourself in that situation? And it's because I'm being challenged maybe to stand in my truth. Right, as opposed to, you know, giving into somebody else's wishes or whatever. So that was interesting. And then the second thing that I was thinking about when everyone was talking was, how does it relate to this whole idea of the pulsation of life, you know, the ebb and the flow? And when I had that experience many years ago, and even now when I have experiences similar, I feel this really strong tension right before it breaks, you know? So that's like the contraction, and the contraction feels painful to me, and the guy is kind of saying like, go with it, don't fight it. But I fight the contraction. And then once something happens and you go into that transition period, the pause, and then the expansion comes afterwards.
You sort of break
I can
through.
feel like, and I feel like that's what I could call the soul movements or whatever. Like you feel your soul, you know, your emotions contract and expand, like the waves of grief, you know, where they're painful and then they release and then it's painful.
It's like a virus. I was gonna say that you're talking about your grief or you know, Bill's passing. So it's I've noticed with grief because, you know, it's like a virus. You know, if you have a virus, a physical virus,
Right.
sometimes you feel okay, and then the wave comes and you really,
Yeah.
grief is exactly like that. It's not like it's not consistent, and there's, you know, and it's not just one, you go like this with grief, but the direction is usually healing.
Well, all of the soul movements, the way it was
Yeah.
talked about, emotional movements
How
seem to be
They are.
erratic and,
Yes, that's what the
you know,
guy was
and it said
saying.
it in the lecture,
Yeah.
but it also in the lecture talked about how even the restrictive parts were part of the growth. So.
Right.
It's all part of the growth.
All here.
Resisting. They feel like you're backsliding.
Yeah, you're backsliding and it's sort of like living with that discomfort of like, you know, why aren't I being that other energy?
I
where,
want that,
you know,
freedom,
where
you
I
know?
feel like I'm on top of the world,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know, really, you know,
Yeah.
having a great time out there and,
Yeah.
you know, stepping aside when someone's coming at me or,
Yeah.
you know,
Right,
Yeah.
or putting myself in a position.
yeah, or being aware and,
Yeah.
you know, like proactive or,
Right, as opposed to not.
right.
Okay,
Okay.
all right, so shall we have our meditation? Anyone else want to say anything?
It's amazing that you could feel all that.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna have a 15-minute meditation. I'm going to read a paragraph from the lecture.
Incredible.
Okay, here we have candle over here. And candle is good.
You're gonna put that light off when you finish reading,
Mhm.
young man.
Jesús, apaga la luz, creo.
Sí, cuando
Okay.
termines de leer, yo lo apago.
Oh,
Gracias.
Yeah.
The ability to stand pleasure, delight, ecstasy depends on the ability to assimilate pain and frustration in an appropriate and truthful way, in the understanding that they are the production of the self. To put the same idea in different words, if you can meet your own negativity, your fears, anger, rage, the traits you do not like, in a rational and unexaggerated way, really meet it face to face and understand it, then you produce the love and trust I discussed. To that measure, you become capable of experiencing delight, pleasure, happiness. There is a direct relationship between the two. You will invariably see that the person who cannot accept pain in a healthy, constructive, and realistic way cannot accept pleasure either.